On this video, marking 1 year since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, or the special military operation launched by Russia, I'm going to talk about an essay or an opinion piece that I have just had published in a significant online public policy journal in Australia called Pearls and Irritations. I'm going to read the piece. It's only 800 words or so, and I'm going to offer you as YouTube viewers some, background to some of the ideas expressed in it, as well as talk about 3 comments from 3 world leaders just this week that seem to resonate with some of the words that I put in that opinion piece. So, welcome to the Burning Archive channel. I talk about history, culture, geopolitics, and especially how it looks not just from the West, but across the whole multipolar world. I'm speaking to you from a quite hot afternoon on February the 24th, 2023 in Melbourne, Australia. And let me talk about this essay that I have just had published in Australia. I've been talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia-Ukraine-NATO war on my podcast, on this YouTube channel, and in various other forums over the last 12 months, quite a bit. But this is the first time I've submitted a piece to a journal, and it was called The Grande Illusions of the West in Ukraine. So let me just read from the piece, and I'll add in a few sort of video essay elements so you don't just have to look at me talking the whole time. And then I'll just explain maybe some of the background, because it's only 800 words, so some of it's fairly compressed, and there's a few sort of references to things that may not be immediately obvious. I'll just explain some of that and some of my intentions behind writing the piece. And then I will talk about how these 3 speeches or 3 comments from 3 different world leaders have seemed to echo some of the words I spoke. Not that I'm saying I'm a prophet or anything. I think it's just some of these ideas are in the air at the moment. And I should say the main idea of the piece is that we are witnessing a tragic failure of the leadership elites of so many of the Western countries, and that in some ways it resembles the collapse of the leadership elites in the slaughter of World War One, which was presented with great humanistic understanding, yet also with a clear denunciation of the follies of leaders who are overconfident about their command of history. In the great film by Jean Renoir, The Grande Illusion, and that is where the title of the piece comes from. So let me just then read from the piece. And I should say, of course, you can read the piece at johnmenadue.com, at this website here, or this website there. Okay, so let me just read then from the piece. The grand illusions of the leaders of Western democracies are crashing to defeat in Ukraine. La Grande Illusion was the 1937 Jean Renoir film that showed the tragic mistakes of the aristocrats of the European empires in World War I. In turn, it referred to a 1910 British tract, The Great Illusion, that claimed war was irrational and impossible in civilized Europe because because it went against the interests of the British imperial liberal rules-based order. The looming defeat of Ukraine, NATO and the USA by Russia is exposing similar tragic mistakes and grand illusions. But how can I say looming defeat in Ukraine? Any reader of the mainstream news in Australia, perhaps across the Western world, but not in India, would scoff at this judgment as we approach the anniversary of the invasion. But I have been commenting on this war on the Burning Archive podcast since before the February 2022 conflict. Russia is clearly winning the war. It is defeating not only Ukraine, but NATO and the USA. It is winning the war militarily. It has overwhelming artillery dominance and is about to take Bakhmut. Russia has withstood the economic war, the sanctions from hell that would turn the ruble into rubble. It exposed the American illusion that Russia is a gas station pretending to be a country. Russia and its strategic partner China are winning diplomatically. Putin has defied the Western illusion that Joe Biden could assemble a World War II-style United Nations of democracies to isolate Russia. The world's largest democracy, India, firmly and politely said, no, the world is more complicated and multipolar than that. Even in the information war, the West has advanced ahead of its supply lines, despite apparent American dominance and unprecedented restrictions on the open society of the West, such as the removal of many Russian media channels. Russia is slowly turning the West's information war blitzkrieg to its advantage. It simply exposes the truth. Ukraine is no democracy. Ukraine really does have a problem with extreme ethno-nationalist ideologies. Ukraine is press-ganging its citizens to die quickly in Donbass in order to prop up American news coverage of the war. Ukraine really has shelled and killed thousands of civilians since 2014. America, as Seymour Hersh reported, and the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in Australia, has yet to report, the ABC has yet to report, America blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, and America, allegedly, and America did so, according to Hersh's sources, in a covert operation that bypassed Congress and harmed its own NATO ally. Thanks to the independent media, the truth will survive the blast. Yet the public perception is Ukraine is winning and can do no wrong. We must stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Recently, the Australian Parliament staged a photo of unity of MPs standing with the Ukrainian flag. The public perception is fed with constant propaganda, such as the Bear Grylls interview with Zelensky. When the really bad news rolls in after the fall of Bakhmut and the grinding offensive of the Russian army, The shock to public opinion may be as consequential to world order as the failures of War One, or indeed the falls of Singapore and Kabul. Perhaps the American and Allied leaderships believed their own propaganda, that they could win any war when they provoked this war by trying to take Russia's queen on Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard. But at least now some realists are speaking up, if covertly, in the corridors of Washington. The Rand Corporation paper on avoiding a long war warns that inflated optimism about success in the war will extend the war, and that the war is not in the interests of the USA. It politely rebukes Secretary State Blinken as too narrowly focused on one dimension of the war's trajectory. Overconfidence about success in war provokes war, makes for long wars, and springs from the grand illusions of national elites. Geoffrey Blaney made the point in 1973 in Causes of War, and the Rand Corporation report and the realist faction in America cite him today. Of course, many critics, including my modest podcast, have exposed these illusions since February 2022. Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, Paul Keating, Tony Kevin, Jeffrey Roberts, Seymour Hersh, many, many more who are shamefully attacked as Russian propagandists. Truth will disperse the illusion. It may take weeks, it may take months or years, but at some stage there will be a reckoning. The end of World War I was not good for the deluded European imperial elites. The end of the war in Ukraine will not be good for the imperial American elites. They have spent too long spinning the virtual realities of manipulated news. America makes its own reality to deal with the realities of a changed multipolar world. They have been exposed as incompetent in waging war with a peer, in fielding diplomacy with independent nations, in framing economies that serve people, not bubbles, and finally in telling their own people the honest truth. Tragically, the grand illusions of this leadership elite will outlive the conscripted soldiers of Ukraine, that dispensable nation that betrayed itself in search of American glory. I hope you enjoyed that. I think perhaps on reading it through, a lot of it's reasonably clear, so perhaps not as much to explain in all the references than I thought. But I think it may be just worth teasing out just a couple of things in what I said there, just so you realise that it's not all just, crazy rants from some opinionated person on the internet, but I think there is actually some pretty substantial evidence behind a lot of what I said. So let me just add in a few things, I guess, about explaining the text. And the first thing is just this first paragraph here that I've highlighted there. The film, The Grande Illusion, I think you can see at least parts of that on the internet, on the old YouTube. And it is a great film, a classic film that really, I guess, portrays some of the honor code of the old sort of imperial military aristocrats who sent millions of people to die in industrial conditions in the trenches of World War One, and some of those illusions. And as I say there, it took its title from a tract published by a British journalist in the 5 years or so before World War One, that the historian Neil Ferguson, indeed, who's no lefty, really described as a kind of a British information war effort against Germany, which really claimed that democracies don't go to war with each other. The world of free trade is such that wars do not happen. And the connection between that and so many of the ideas of the last 30 years of the unipolar moment and the post-Cold War era is why I've referred to that era as the British imperial liberal rules-based order. Okay, and then in this sort of paragraph here, I kind of do a really quick summary of the 4 victors of the war that I covered quite extensively in my podcasts through 2022 and my YouTube videos in late 2022 and early 2023 that sort of assessed the progress of the war against 4 vectors of military combat, diplomatic struggle, informational culture war, and economic war. And I've really, I guess, provided a condensed summary of those things. I'm actually planning to do 2 more podcast/YouTube videos over the next week about assessing where we're at 1 year on from the Russia-Ukraine war. One of them is going to be really focused in on the diplomatic chessboard. Where are we now with the diplomatic chessboard, and expanding the idea that I've discussed there, that Russia and its strategic partner China are winning diplomatically. And I think we've seen some pretty significant news over the last couple of days that tends to confirm that. There are many channels you can check out who are more expert and up-to-date with the military situation than me, but my read of the Rand Corporation report and so much that is coming out is, I think, justifies that comment there around about winning the war militarily. And then I guess the other interesting point here is a little bit further down, where I talk about the change in the information war and the fact that it's really due to the independent media that, like channels like mine, I guess, on YouTube, and channels like the Duran and Brian Bertoletic and Colonel Douglas McGregor and so many others that have exposed the truth. It's due to the ability to check out Telegram and see what's really happening on the ground to some degree in Ukraine, and not rely on the general mainstream news coverage, which still has not adequately reported that horrible act of terrorism related to the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. But by all accounts, Seymour Hersh has more reports to come. So ultimately, as I say, the truth will survive the blast. I guess also just here, there is this point about America trying to take Russia's queen on Brzezinski's grand chessboard. And what I'm referring to there is a book that is a big new Brzezinski, the former national security advisor to the United States, and really one of the intellectual leaders for the whole idea of describing the Soviet Union as an authoritarian state, the architect of an enormous amount of American foreign policy, hawkish foreign policy, including drawing the Soviet Union into Afghanistan in the 1970s by providing covert support for the Mujahideen, and ultimately Osama bin Laden. He wrote a book in the 1990s called The Grand Chessboard, which really reiterated the whole idea that the world is a chessboard that American grand strategists play on, and what they need to do is control Eurasia by controlling the heartland of Eurasia, which is Russia, and that they can strike at Russia by going through the soft underbelly of Ukraine. And so this whole, the strategic importance of Ukraine has been reflected in that strategy for a very long time. Okay, and then just one final reference, just to explain a little bit, is this reference here that the virtual realities of manipulated news. Now, I think I wrote a piece on my Substack a couple of weeks ago about the virtual reality state, which is the idea that to some degree political and media elites have grown so intertwined. What we call the mainstream news has become almost part of the presentation, the performance of politics these days, and that what is actually reported has become so removed from any kind of earthbound reality that it is like a virtual reality performance. And the comment that America makes its own reality is a quote attributed to Karl Rove, George W. Bush's key political advisor, as part of the hubris of the post-Cold War era, where America believed it could command the world and just conduct wars wherever and whenever it wanted to. America could make its own reality. Those days are well and truly over, and America needs to face up to the realities of a new, more complicated, multipolar world. One of the big themes I talk about a lot on this channel. So that's my piece. Ultimately, I think it's a humanistic vision that I'm trying to convey here. The extraordinary tragedy that Ukraine as a country, as a population, as an economy, as a military, as a set of ideas, as a culture, has been devastated, really. Not so much by a Russian action as by being lured by the Americans into being the theatre of its operation in this proxy war against Russia. And it is deeply, deeply tragic. Everyone who says Slava Ukrainia really, I imply in that final line, is really pronouncing the glory of the American empire, and that is a deeply tragic thing. However, look, there's been these several comments by world leaders that have eerily echoed some of the statements and comments I made in the piece, and I'm just going to play a couple of these little segments from them. And the first comment comes from Dr. S.J. Shankar, the External Affairs Minister from India, who I made a video about just a week or so ago. He's written a fabulous book called The India Way, which is a great guide to the multipolar world. But he's made a couple of comments about George Soros, who appeared to be intervening in domestic Indian politics, and accused India of not really being a democracy. and as well as Dr. J. Shankar describing George Soros as old, opinionated, rich and dangerous. He said this about what this said about democracy, which I think echoed the very first line of my piece, The Grand Illusions of the Leaders of the Western Democracies are Crashing to Defeat.
So for me, it's actually necessary today that we have today a serious conversation on democracy. When I look at my own democracy, I have today a voter turnout which is unprecedented, electoral outcomes which are decisive, electoral processes which are not questioned. We are not one of those countries where after the election somebody goes to arbitrate in court. Okay, we don't have any hanging chads either.
So he's really saying, stop lecturing India about democracy, isn't he? And he's made the remark somewhere else that there are more citizens of democracies in states that are outside Western democracies these days, so that the ideas that Western democracies have about the shape and the future of democracies perhaps need to take a back seat to the visions and the new developments in other parts of the world. America is really no longer the leader of the free world. And so that's statement number one. Statement number two is from Joe Biden, and this is perhaps an uncanny reference. You love the blue and yellow themes there in the White House's official presentation of Joe Biden's speech in Warsaw, marking the near anniversary of the war, and perhaps also echoing the speech he made nearly a year ago as well, where he said there had to be regime change in Russia, that Vladimir Putin must go. But nonetheless, this is what Joe Biden had to say, which has an uncanny echo of what I said in the final sentence of my piece.
So tonight, I speak once more to the people of Russia. The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia.
Well, some people have said the opposite, but, we'll let that pass.
The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today.
Well, Seymour Hersh would disagree.
And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war. If Ukraine stopped defending itself against Russia, it would be the end of Ukraine.
The end of Ukraine. Goodness me. Ukraine betraying itself for the sake of American glory. A bit of an eerie comment, really, from Joe Biden, perhaps meant to rally strength and support and the support of allies, but perhaps also emphasising that Ukraine is risking everything in this war, and it is not the main beneficiary of the war. Okay, so I've presented Joe Biden's views on the war. What about Vladimir Putin's? And I'm just going to play the very last minute and a half of Vladimir Putin's speech on the 21st of February, which is effectively like the State of the Union speech to the Russian Parliament. He covered, the war, a whole lot of domestic economic policy issues as well. But there's a particular statement right at the end, which again has an uncanny resonance with what I said in my speech. Not that I'm a Putin puppet or anything, but we shall see.
Other people. The United Front has gathered more than 5 billion rubles.
So he's just talking about the
many donations are
donation
to
effort
flow.
from
It is important
ordinary
for
Russian
everyone to continue
citizens
to contribute, both
support
larger enterprises
the
and
war and
businessmen. But
refugees
what
and
is
stuff.
especially touching and inspiring, the situation when people with modest income are sending part of their pensions, of their salaries to donate. Such a unity to help our warriors and civilians in the combat zone, to refugees, is very important. Thank you very much for this sincere support, for this unity, for helping each other, because something that is of huge significance, something that cannot be overestimated.
Now the sting at the end of the speech.
Russia will stand up to any challenges because we are one country. We are one big and united people. We are confident about ourselves. We are confident about our strength. The truth is with us.
The truth is with
Thank
us.
you.
I should also say that there was also a significant speech by a former world leader, Donald Trump, during the week, where he basically came out against the Ukraine war. And what a strange situation we are in when Donald Trump might be a greater path for peace in America than any other alternative political leader. There is also a bit of a growing sentiment in America against the Ukraine war, against the overextension of America in so many parts of the world. But there's a very scary edge to a lot of that, which seems to make a insane bogeyman out of China. And I'm also doing some other videos on the channel, which are like 7 insights from 7 historians on how to avoid a conflict between, well, a military war between the United States and China. So you might want to check those out as well. I think we would all be better off if America redirected some of its vision, some of its energy, some of its wealth, and some of its crusading spirit to improve the lot of its own people, of its own country, rather than exporting war and democracy to the rest of the world. I'm going to be talking also on my audio podcast about that serious debate we need to have about democracy that Dr. Jaishankar referred to, because that's going to be the kind of focus of my next sort of book, long essay project. Have we come to the end of Western democracy, and what is a good public life like after Western democracy? I'm also going to be doing a longer, another YouTube video next Thursday or next Friday on reviewing the diplomatic chessboard of the Russia-Ukraine-NATO war. And I just want to do that a few days after the official anniversary, because there's a lot of speculation about big things happening. And of course, one big thing that has happened is China has now released kind of a position paper on how to change global security and how to secure peace in Ukraine and Europe. So there have been some big additional pieces placed on that diplomatic chessboard around the conflict in Ukraine. So do join me for those, and I'll see you in the next video.